The Everglades is an ecosystem that is deeply integral to the well-being of Florida for a variety of reasons, but this ecosystem is under constant threat due to its ongoing development. This development leads to rising levels of toxicity within the fragile environment. Jessica R. Catalino discusses how the politics of water is viewed by a couple of groups, namely those from a settler colonial background and those from an indigenous background. She explores how these two backgrounds lead to differences in perception of how the water in the Everglades should be treated and managed. The drainage of the Everglades is most closely related to the disaster element of toxic worlding, as it is a disaster that is slowly creeping upon us. The gradual drainage and development of the Everglades creates an increasingly dire situation, and studying the different mindsets around the politics of this can lead to a better understanding of the situation. In exploring the ways these different mentalities view the situation, Catalino is answering questions about how these mentalities lead to the current disaster. Exploring how different backgrounds can predispose people to think about the same situation in different ways is inherently ethnographic, and I would argue is one of the main studies in ethnography. Nausicaa and the relevant article that we read in class is a story that broadened my views on what could be considered toxic and what isn't. Humans themselves could be considered toxic to the Everglades in much the same way that Denise Ask Nunes discusses that humans are posed as toxic to the land in Nausicaa. The research I would conduct would most likely be observing how the people that often enjoy time in the Everglades, such as those that tend to go hiking, fishing, and/or boating in the Everglades, interact with the Everglades environment. In order to conduct the research in an ethical manner, I would ask groups of those who often spend time in the Everglades for recreational purposes if they would be all right with me accompanying them for research purposes, and in doing so, highlighting everything I would do and why. I would also ask the people I'm accompanying if I can conduct an optional interview after accompanying them in which I will ask them about their views on the drainage and development of the Everglades. All of Florida is being and will be affected by the drainage and development of the Everglades, with South Florida feeling the brunt of the impact. In her discussion, Catalino identifies the two main groups being affected as those from a settler colonial background and those from an indigenous background. Catalino poses the two groups involved in the development of the Everglades as those from a settler colonial background and those from an indigenous background. But while it is useful, this is a generalized view. There are, both currently and historically, many people from different backgrounds present within Florida, and it is important to also explore their roles. Education is something that can vary between different backgrounds, specifically what and how people have been taught. One method that I believe could expand upon the research presented in Catalino's discussion is exploring the different subjects and methods used to teach Floridian children about the Everglades. The methods and material used to teach children about a topic can influence the way they think about the topic, in this case, the Everglades, far later in life. I myself was taught as a child that the Everglades is something that we should protect, and that is something that I still believe. To add to this idea, by examining course curriculum containing the Everglades' current and past, we can also gain insight into what the adult community at the time thought it was important to pass on to the children, and thus what the general mindset and politics about the Everglades were at the time. Another important thing to consider is how activities in already developed areas of the Everglades are impacting the people and politics of the Everglades. Corporations, such as sugar corporations, take many actions that negatively impact the lives and health of those living near the Everglades. The Everglades also hosts a decent tourism economy. Studying the way development impacts those who make a living off Everglades tourism is a topic that has yet to be thoroughly explored, and could lead to new views on the Everglades' draining. In her discussion, Catalino also briefly touched upon how water management is being mostly done by the Seminole tribe within the Big Cypress Preserve, but more research should be done into how and why the water management practices performed by the Seminoles differ from the rest of Florida, or if they even differ at all. One of the more interesting parts of ethnographic studies of disasters is the research done into the afterlives of people. While the Everglades' drainage is not a sudden enough disaster to cause many afterlives, there are still significant enough changes caused to certain communities, such as the Miccosukee tribe, that their afterlives could be studied. A question that I often find myself wondering about when thinking of the Everglades is how does the media's portrayal of the drain versus conserve conflict influence the public's view of this disaster? The general answer is that Floridians nowadays think negatively of draining the Everglades, but the full truth is much more nuanced. While in theory most Floridians do not support developing the Everglades, the truth is that with Florida's growing population, people do begrudgingly allow the expansion of developments near the Everglades. There is also a large portion of Floridians that are against immigration to Florida in order to protect the Everglades. There are a variety of influences upon the politics and mindsets about the Everglades. These influences can lead to shifts in the ideologies that impact actions taken to protect or not protect the Everglades' ecosystem, and an ethnographic understanding of these influences can lead to better conservation of the Everglades.